The drawing room of Ashford Manor was suffocating. Eleanor stood motionless beside the window, her plain grey dress practically invisible against the heavy damask curtains, as the Countess of Ashford delivered her final judgment. "You are a blight upon this household," Lady Ashford said, her voice cutting like glass. "Illegitimate, impoverished, and now a thief." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Eleanor's hands trembled. She did not reach for the bracelet on the table. She never did. But the Countess had decided, and in the world of aristocracy, a Countess's decision was law. "I will not have you remain a moment longer than necessary," Lady Ashford continued, her eyes cold as January frost. "You came here as a favor to my late sister, God rest her complicated soul, to educate my children. Instead, you've filled them with romantic notions of love and dignity. Disgusting." Eleanor's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "My lady, I swear upon my mother's grave, your mother was a governess who seduced a married man," the Countess interrupted sharply. "And you are the result of that sin. Do not speak to me of graves or honor." Eleanor closed her eyes. She had heard variations of this her entire life. Her father, the Viscount who never claimed her, was a scandal the family desperately wanted forgotten. Eleanor was living proof that forgetting was impossible. "Pack your things," Lady Ashford commanded. "My son has graciously arranged for you to take a position at Thornfield Finishing School for girls in Yorkshire." "Servants, you say? Excellent. You will work there, below stairs. You will never tell anyone about this household or your time here." Eleanor's throat tightened. Thornfield, the place where disgraced women were sent to disappear. "The carriage leaves at dawn," the Countess finished, turning away. "You are dismissed." Eleanor curtsied, a habit so ingrained she could do it even in agony, and walked from the room with her spine straight. She had learned long ago that pride was all a woman like her possessed. She was 22 years old, and the world had just told her, once again, that she did not belong. The carriage that carried Eleanor north was cold, and so was the woman who rode beside her. Mrs. Hartwell was the head of Thornfield, a skeletal woman with silver hair pinned so tightly it seemed to pull her face toward the heavens. She did not look at Eleanor once during the entire 3-day journey. "You will address yourself as Miss Eleanor," Mrs. Hartwell finally spoke as they turned up the drive to Thornfield. "No other name is necessary. You will work in the kitchens, the laundry, and the schoolrooms as needed. You will not speak to the students except to give them instruction or correction. You will take your meals alone. You will not smile. This is penance for whatever sins brought you here." Eleanor nodded. She was good at nodding, at accepting, at existing in the spaces people deemed appropriate for women like her. Thornfield was worse than she imagined. It was a vast, gray structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The girls who attended were daughters of minor gentry and wealthy merchants' wives. Girls whose only fault was loving the wrong man or refusing to marry the right one. They were sent here to be broken and remade into proper vessels for their family's ambitions. Eleanor watched their hope die by increments. She watched them learn to smile without meaning, to speak without saying anything at all, to be present while removing themselves entirely from the moment. For 2 years, she scrubbed floors and sorted linens and taught young ladies the proper way to waltz, while the music came from an ancient piano and her own frozen heart. No one knew her real name. No one cared where she came from. She was simply the ghost who haunted Thornfield's corridors. Then, on a winter evening when snow fell so thick it seemed the world might disappear entirely, everything changed. The carriage that arrived at Thornfield's gates carried the Duke of Ravenswood. Eleanor was in the kitchens when she heard the commotion. The servants' excitement, the hurried preparations, the sudden bustling that meant someone important had come. She continued folding linens. Important people's visits meant nothing to her. But then Mrs. Hartwell appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face flushed with unusual color. "Miss Eleanor, you're to come to the sitting room immediately. The Duke requires a tutor for his ward." Eleanor's hands stilled in the fabric. "His ward?" she repeated quietly. "A girl, 14 years old, living in complete isolation at his estate. He's heard that Thornfield produces disciplined, proper young ladies, and he wants you specifically, to come teach her. Mrs. Hartwell doesn't understand why he'd ask for you. The overlooked scullery maid. But if he's asking, that's who he'll receive. Eleanor set down the linen. Her heart, which she had thought frozen beyond the possibility of emotion, gave a small, painful lurch. She had never seen the Duke of Ravenswood before. The nation's newspapers had written extensively about him. A man in his early 30s, handsome in that careless way the wealthy seem to possess, unmarried and apparently content to remain so. He was known for his progressive views on land reform, his vast holdings, and his absolute refusal to participate in society. He was also known as a man of ice. When Eleanor was shown into the sitting room, she saw him standing with his back to the fire, all sharp angles and expensive tailoring. He turned as she entered, and his gray eyes moved over her with the disinterest of someone examining a piece of furniture. "You're the one Hartwell recommended?" His voice matched his appearance. Cool, composed, thoroughly unimpressed. Eleanor curtsied. "Yes, Your Grace." "Your name?" "Miss Eleanor, Your Grace." Something flashed across his face. Irritation or amusement. She couldn't tell. "That's not a name. That's what you call a person when you don't know who they are." Eleanor said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Tell me why Thornfield would send their most invisible employee to teach my ward. Surely you have more experienced instructors." "I don't know, Your Grace. I only teach when assigned." The Duke studied her for a long moment. "You're guarded, evasive. Why would Hartwell think that appropriate for a 14-year-old girl?" Eleanor's hands, clasped before her, remained perfectly still. "Perhaps your ward requires someone who understands the cost of speaking unwisely." The Duke's eyes narrowed. That flash again, this time definitely not disinterest. "You're impertinent." "I apologize, Your Grace." "Don't apologize. I dislike false contrition." He turned back to the fire. "My ward's name is Catherine. She was found abandoned at my estate 3 years ago. A child of perhaps 11, half-starved, unable to speak about her past. She does not interact with anyone. She reads obsessively. She will not eat in front of others. Her entire world is books and isolation." Eleanor felt something in her chest recognize something in his words. An understanding that had nothing to do with conversation. "I thought perhaps," the Duke continued, "someone as obviously damaged as Thornfield has made you would be less threatening to her than someone whole. The cruelty of it should have stung." Instead, Eleanor felt only recognition. He had seen through her instantly. She was damaged. Thornfield had not made her that way. The world had. He had simply named the truth aloud. "I will teach her," Eleanor said quietly. "You will teach her deportment, languages, mathematics, history, and literature. You will teach her to take her place in society should she ever wish to claim it. You will not ask her about her past. You will not pity her. You will not form attachments." The Duke turned to face her once more. "My servants call her a ghost child. I will not have you becoming equally spectral. You will remain professional and distant at all times." "Yes, Your Grace. You will begin on Monday. My steward will provide you with a room in the governess's wing. You will address yourself with the decency appropriate to your station. You will not speak to anyone in my household except to conduct your duties. You will not encourage Catherine to speak to you about anything except her lessons." He paused. "Do you understand, Miss Eleanor?" "I do, Your Grace." "Good." He moved toward the door, then stopped without turning. "Why are you at Thornfield? What crime made them banish you?" Eleanor's breath caught. "I didn't steal," she said softly. "But no one believed me." The Duke left without another word. Ravenswood House was beautiful in the way that wealth and centuries could make something beautiful. The walls were lined with paintings of the Duke's ancestors, all of them looking as severe and unyielding as he did. The gardens were geometric and perfect. The library held thousands of volumes. It was also utterly, completely lonely. Eleanor's rooms were small but clean, overlooking the eastern gardens where snow still clung to the rose bushes. She was given clear instructions. Her meals would be left outside her room. She would take them alone. She would not enter the main parts of the house except during the hours appointed for Catherine's lessons. Catherine. Eleanor first saw the girl in a schoolroom that overlooked the same gardens. She was thin, desperately thin, with dark hair and dark eyes that held something simultaneously ancient and terrified. She sat at the far end of the table and did not acknowledge Eleanor's presence. "Good morning," Eleanor said, settling herself in a chair positioned neither too close nor too far away. "I'm Miss Eleanor. I'll be teaching you history beginning today." Catherine did not respond, did not even blink. Eleanor opened her book. "I thought we might begin with the Tudors, particularly Mary, Queen of Scots. There's a remarkable parallel in her life to some themes we'll explore in your literature studies. She was separated from her child, abandoned by those she loved, and ultimately destroyed by the fear she inspired in others, particularly another woman. Still nothing." Eleanor read a passage from a history text, her voice steady and calm. She did not expect Catherine to speak. She did not require engagement. She simply existed in the room with the girl, two broken people learning to breathe in the same space. By the third day, Catherine turned a page in her own book while Eleanor was reading. By the second week, Catherine took her lunch in the same room, though not at the same table. By the third week, Eleanor asked a question and received an answer. A single word, whispered so softly it barely disturbed the air. "Yes." The Duke observed these sessions once, standing in the doorway for exactly 5 minutes before leaving without comment. Eleanor felt his presence like a hand on her spine. She did not acknowledge it. She simply continued teaching as though the most powerful man in the county was not watching her with those gray eyes, as though her heart was not behaving like a terrified bird in her chest. Winter bled into spring, and the gardens came alive. Eleanor and Catherine walked through them now, lessons conducted among the flowering things rather than in the schoolroom. The girl spoke more, though still rarely, still with the hesitation of someone who had learned that words could be weapons. Catherine was brilliant. Her mind was sharp and acquisitive. She asked questions that made Eleanor think, that challenged her understanding of literature and history and human nature. She was also, Eleanor realized, testing her. Testing to see if Eleanor would betray her confidence, use her words against her, confirm all the terrible things Catherine clearly believed about the world. Eleanor never did. One afternoon in May, as they sat beneath a flowering magnolia, Catherine asked her first truly personal question. "Why do you never smile?" Eleanor considered lying. Instead, she said, "I was taught that smiling is indulgent, that it draws unwanted attention." "Who taught you that?" "The world," Eleanor said simply. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Then, "The Duke never smiles either." "No," Eleanor agreed. "He found me," Catherine said, the words coming in a rush as if they might escape before she could speak them. "On his estate. I was hiding from someone. I don't remember who or why anymore, but I remember that I thought he would send me away, that he would be like everyone else." Eleanor waited. "He let me stay. He didn't ask questions. He just let me be. And then when I was ready to stop being nothing, he helped me become something." Catherine's dark eyes met Eleanor's. "He's not cruel, Miss Eleanor. He's just afraid. I think he's more afraid than either of us." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly. She placed them in her lap. "Of what is he afraid?" "That if he lets anyone close, they'll see who he really is. And he thinks whoever he really is underneath is unacceptable." Catherine looked back toward the garden. "I used to think the same thing. Maybe I still do. But I'm learning that the Duke, he accepts people precisely because he knows how it feels to be unacceptable." That evening, Eleanor sat in her room and did something she had not done in 4 years. She wept. The dinner invitation came without warning, delivered to Eleanor's room on a pale cream card, written in the Duke's sharp, economical handwriting. "Miss Eleanor is requested at dinner, 7 o'clock, the formal dining room." Eleanor read it 3 times, certain she had misunderstood. The Duke had made it clear that she was not to integrate herself into household society. She was to remain invisible, professional, separate. A dinner invitation was a violation of every boundary he had established. She considered refusing. Then she considered that refusing a duke's request was not actually a choice a woman in her position could make. She wore her best dress, a plain dove-gray muslin that was still, even after 3 years, the finest thing she owned. She arranged her hair as carefully as her limited skills allowed. She descended the grand staircase at 6:58 p.m., her heart executing a series of acrobatics in her chest. The Duke was waiting in the dining room. He was dressed formally, looking every inch the powerful aristocrat, every inch the man she had been taught to fear and navigate around. He did not acknowledge her immediately. He simply stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking at her with those gray eyes that seemed to see through everything she pretended to be. "You're punctual," he finally said. "Yes, Your Grace. Catherine has made considerable progress. The improvement is remarkable. Her verbal engagement has increased. Her appetite is near normal. Her capacity for social interaction has expanded exponentially." Eleanor waited for him to continue. He did not. "I'm pleased to hear it, Your Grace. She attributes this to your influence," he said, and there was something strange in his voice, something that might have been anger or gratitude or both. "She credits you with teaching her that she is not inherently unlovable simply because her past is unacceptable." Eleanor felt her throat close. "Catherine is a remarkable girl," she said carefully. "She required only someone who understood that survival is not the same as thriving, and someone patient enough to wait while she learned the difference." "And do you believe that yourself?" The Duke moved closer, not threateningly, but with an intensity that made Eleanor feel suddenly exposed. "Do you believe you are not inherently unlovable?" Eleanor could not speak, could not move, could not exist in any way that felt real. "I've made inquiries," the Duke continued softly, "about Thornfield, about how you came to be there, about the bracelet that disappeared from Ashford Manor 2 years before you were sent to that place." Eleanor's vision blurred. "Your Grace, I swear. I know you didn't steal it. I had it investigated. The bracelet appeared in a London jeweler's inventory after you left Ashford. I traced the seller. It was the Countess's own lady's maid, who had committed the theft and allowed you to be blamed so that she herself could not be suspected." Eleanor opened her mouth, but nothing emerged. "The maid has since died. The Countess never heard otherwise. You were blamed for a crime you did not commit and banished because your very existence was an inconvenience to people who should have protected you." The Duke's voice was steady and cold, but Eleanor saw something else now, saw beneath the ice to the fury beneath it. "Your only sin was being born illegitimate. Everything else was cruelty perpetrated upon you by people with power." Eleanor sank into the nearest chair. Her legs would no longer support her. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because Catherine is not the only one at Ravenswood who has learned to armor themselves against the world," the Duke said. He remained standing, and Eleanor understood suddenly that this was intentional, that he was offering her the power of height, of position, of advantage, that this, too, was a form of acceptance. "Because I have spent 8 years telling myself that I should not burden anyone with my company, that I should remain alone because solitude is safer than betrayal. Because I watched you teach Catherine with more love than you have ever demonstrated toward yourself, and I realized something that I should have understood years ago." Eleanor looked up at him, unable to breathe. "The world says that women like you, women born on the wrong side of propriety, are broken," he said quietly. "The world says that you are stains on the fabric of society and should be hidden away. The world says that I, as the Duke of Ravenswood, should never associate with someone whose birth is illegitimate, whose reputation is tainted, whose very existence challenges conventional morality." He extended his hand to her, a gesture so formal and so absolutely transgressive that Eleanor felt the world shift on its axis. "I no longer care what the world says," he continued. "I care only what I have observed. I have observed your dignity, your strength, your capacity to love people who have been broken by the same systems that broke you. I have observed that you are extraordinary, and I will not have you hidden away any longer." Eleanor did not take his hand. Instead, she said very carefully, "I am afraid, Your Grace. I have been afraid for so long that I have forgotten who I am beneath the fear. If I take your hand, everything changes. The security I have built, the invisibility that protects me, it will all be destroyed. I will become visible, and visible women like me are always punished." "Yes," the Duke agreed simply. "You will be visible. You will be scrutinized. Your legitimacy will be questioned, your motives suspected, your position in this household a scandal. But you will also be protected. You will have my name, my resources, my power standing between you and every judgment the world makes against you. And if you regret it?" Eleanor asked, the question barely a whisper. "If you realize that I am not worth the scandal I will bring?" The Duke finally smiled. A small, fractured thing that transformed his entire face. "Catherine said something to me yesterday. She said that the bravest people are not those who have never been afraid, but those who are afraid and choose to trust anyway. I think she was speaking about both of us." Eleanor took his hand. The scandal erupted 6 weeks after the announcement of their engagement. Countess Ashford wrote letters claiming that Eleanor was a thief and a seductress. Anonymous publications suggested that the Duke had lost his mind. Society matrons whispered that the girl was a fortune hunter, that she had manipulated the impressionable Duke, that no good could come of such an inappropriate union. Eleanor read about herself in the scandal sheets and tried not to flinch. What the world did not know was that the Duke had released his own carefully worded statement revealing the true nature of Eleanor's dismissal from Ashford. He had not named the lady's maid. He was not a cruel man, but he had made it clear that Eleanor was the victim of false accusation. He had donated a substantial sum to Thornfield on the condition that they improve their hiring practices and implement measures to prevent the abuse of girls in their care. He had published a letter to the newspapers detailing the economic plight of poor women and the vulnerability of those without male family advocates. He had, in short, been absolutely relentless in his defense of her character. Society, shocked into compliance by the sheer force of his position and the logic of his arguments, slowly began to shift. Or at least, the shifting began quietly in drawing rooms where Eleanor was discussed. Gradually, the narrative changed from seductress to victim, and then, slowly still, to woman unfairly treated who had been rescued. Eleanor did not care what society thought. She only cared that the Duke remained steady. He did. Even on the day of their wedding, when half the aristocracy refused invitations out of protest, when Eleanor walked down the aisle in a white dress that whispered that she was acceptable now, finally, after all these years. Even as they exchanged vows, Eleanor held her breath, waiting for him to realize his mistake. He did not. The marriage was consummate on their wedding night, and it was tender and tentative and absolutely shocking in its compassion. The Duke did not demand. He did not take. He asked repeatedly if Eleanor was comfortable, if she was afraid, if she wished him to stop. By the end of the night, Eleanor had cried so much that her face was blotched with tears, and the Duke held her while she wept for every year she had been told she was worthless, every moment she had believed it, every time she had learned to apologize for existing. "I'm sorry," she kept saying, unable to form any other words. "Never apologize for your emotions," the Duke said into her hair, and Eleanor realized that she was loved, wholly, entirely, completely loved by someone who had every reason to be as broken as she was, but who had chosen, instead, to be whole. A year later, Eleanor stood in Ravenswood House's grand ballroom, crowned in diamonds that had belonged to Dukes' wives for 300 years. She wore a gown of pale blue silk that would have made the girl she used to be weep, the girl who had worn gray, who had made herself invisible, who had believed that she could never be worthy of brightness. Catherine danced with a young man, Lord Worthington, the son of a neighboring earl, kind and attentive and entirely aware of the privilege he had been granted in courting such a remarkable girl. The Dowager Duchess, the Duke's mother, who had initially written scathing letters about her son's choice, sat beside Eleanor's mother, of all people. Eleanor's mother had arrived 3 months earlier, brought to England by the Duke's steward with instructions to deliver her safely to her daughter. She had wept upon arriving. She had wept again, still, every time she looked at Eleanor's ring. The Duke found Eleanor in the crowd of well-wishers, and when he took her hand, Eleanor felt the same shock of recognition she always felt. This man, this specific man had seen her, had believed in her, had refused, absolutely and completely, to let the world define her. "Are you happy?" he asked, not for the first time, never tired of asking. Eleanor looked at the life that had emerged from the ashes of her shame. She looked at the diamonds, at the ballroom, at Catherine's laughter, at her mother's joy, at the hundreds of faces that had once condemned her, now smiling in her direction because society followed the Duke's lead. "I am grateful," she said carefully. "I am secure. I am protected. But happiness feels like something I do not deserve." The Duke pulled her closer, unconcerned about propriety, unconcerned about who was watching. "Then let me tell you what I see," he said. "I see a woman who survived. I see a woman who loved a broken child when no one else would, because she understood brokenness. I see a woman who is changing the course of her own history by refusing to believe the lies that were told about her. I see, standing before me, the most magnificent woman I have ever encountered. You do not deserve happiness the way you seem to imagine, as a reward from the world. You deserve it the way I deserve it, which is simply by virtue of existing, by being human, by choosing, every day, to continue standing even when the world has knocked you down." "I love you," Eleanor whispered, and felt the words land differently than all the other words she had ever spoken. These were not apologies or explanations or justifications. These were simply the truth. "I know," the Duke said, and kissed his wife in the middle of the ballroom, in front of every person who had ever doubted her, in front of everyone who had called her a stain and a shame and a disaster. And Eleanor understood, finally, what Catherine had understood a year earlier when she asked Eleanor if she was afraid to be visible. Yes, she had been afraid. Yes, she had been betrayed and abandoned and blamed for crimes she did not commit. Yes, the world had tried to tell her that her illegitimate birth was an eternal mark against her soul. But she had chosen trust anyway, and trust had transformed her from a ghost haunting other people's lives into a woman crowned in diamonds, loved completely, and finally, at last, home.